Australia's Labor Prime Minister, John Curtin.
I'm happy to be back in Australia. I've seen many things and many places. And although every man can be forgiven for loving his own country best, I believe it is an impartial assessment of the facts to say that I have not seen any country or any people better than my own.
Welcome to Curtin's Cast, the John Curtin Research Centre's podcast, brought to you by myself, Nick Dyrenfurth, and RedBridge's Kos Samaras. Each week, we bring you the freshest and most challenging conversations from the world of Australian and global politics, culture, and ideas. Good morning and welcome back, Curtinistas. Welcome back to Curtin's Cast. I'm Nick Dyrenfurth, Head Honcho Executive Director of the John Curtin Research Centre, joined again by Australia's leading pollster, RedBridge's Kung Fu Kos Samaras. Good morning, Kos.
Good morning, mate.
How are you? We missed you last week. The right-wing death beasts, nut jobs on social media, they missed you too.
Oh, poor things.
They tears welled up. They went into withdrawal. They were shaking, sweating, couldn't sleep.
Which actually, that's actually their permanent state of mind, but beside the point.
Well, they're going to be even more rocked by this morning's polls. And this week on Curtin's Cast, we're unpacking two extraordinary pieces of RedBridge and Accent Research polling. One Nation is now Australia's most popular political party. Pauline Hanson is now Australia's most popular political leader. We're going to deep dive into today's RedBridge accent poll and last week's MRP seat modelling, suggesting that the Australian two-party or two-and-a-half-party political system is fragmenting faster than either major party seems willing to admit, but especially the right of politics. This is not just another protest vote. It would appear we are watching the biggest realignment in modern Australian history. Kos, let's start with this morning's AFR poll shock. Headline numbers: One Nation 31, Labor 28, Coalition 20. Take it away.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically a continuation of the trend that we've now been seeing for a number of months. What do those numbers mean? Well, you have to actually do an MRP to work out what does that number mean. So yes, okay, One Nation's 31 and Labor's at 28, but what we do know via an MRP is that the majority of seats in our big cities are still occupied by Labor, and One Nation basically sweeps the field in regional Australia, but also some parts of peri-urban Australia as well. To give you the contrast, in Queensland, basically the LNP is completely wiped out. There isn't a single seat left at a federal level, and it's all won by One Nation, and whatever's left in Brisbane is picked up by the Labor Party. So that's the sort of contrast we're looking at. We are living through, as you touched on, Nick, a transitional period, but more importantly, I would say that there is a realignment occurring, and I think unless something changes, the next election is going to be Labor versus One Nation.
Yes, I'm struck, Kos. I've written a long piece for The Australian this week. I'm struck by some of the parallels with Labor's rise when it was the insurgent party in the early 20th century, and there was a sense of shock and disbelief and even snobbish hostility on behalf of. There were really three forces on the centre right of politics. You had Alfred Deakin's Liberal Protectionists. You had George Reid's Free Traders, who restyled themselves as the Anti-Socialist Party, along with Sir John Forrest from Western Australia. They couldn't believe what they were seeing when Labor first formed minority government in 1904. John Forrest famously exclaimed to the Speaker when Chris Watson's Labor government took the Treasury benches, he said, "Mr. Speaker, what are those men doing in our seats?" And that's what I was reminded of by these poll numbers. Now, One Nation still. Let's have a bit of a reality check. At the moment, it's got one seat in the lower house, but this is no longer just a protest vote, is it, Kos? Can we now say we are seeing a permanent structural realignment where One Nation, unless the unforeseen events happen and it implodes It's here to stay. Polling in the 20s. According to your poll, it's up at 31%, and we're seeing similar numbers across other opinion polls. And what we're also seeing, Kos, is it's quite clearly taking. It seems to be taking numbers off Labor now, which can't.
It's been
be
taking
denied.
numbers. It's been taking numbers off Labor now for some time. I mean, it's always been an 80-20 thing. So about 80% of their growth is coming from the coalition, and to a lesser extent Labor. That's been the trend now for some time. Labor's decline since the last poll that we did for the Australian Financial Review has, on this occasion, largely been to other parties. There's a bit of it's gone to One Nation, but a lot of the 3%, 2 of it is gone to other parties rather than One Nation. The coalition's dropped again in that period. So there was some commentary at the time that the coalition was buoyed by their response to the budget and that they had a spring in their step. Well, they had a spring in their step, all right, off a cliff, and their decline continues. And I've seen no evidence that they've learnt the lessons of the last 6 months. But I don't think anything they can do now is going to reverse what we're seeing, which is that seismic shift away from established politics. And it's occurring largely on the right side. It is touching Labor. We could see that in our MRP, where Labor's losing seats like Hunter. Tight contests with One Nation in Patterson and Robertson, Hawke, McEwen, and so on. But I would say one thing, though, and I made that point in a radio interview this morning, that right now it's a referendum on the Albanese government. But when an election turns up, people are going to have to choose. Who do they want in the lodge? And I still will put my money on Labor winning that contest.
Yes, and it is now a Labor versus One Nation contest. There was a bit of an odd poll in the News Corp tabloids by Fox and Hedgehog, and that they projected that One Nation was ahead of Labor on some kind of two-party preferred vote. How do you explain that?
That's their methodology. I'll leave them to explain their methodology, but I think most consistently across most polls where we're seeing this trend, and the trend is that One Nation is at the moment a little bit ahead of the Labor camp. Labor has lost skin to its flanks, and that's about it, really.
Let's park the budget for a moment, mate. But let's deep dive into the MRP and perhaps play some caveats around the One Nation growth. It's more concentrated than, for instance, the Labor vote, which is sort of spread out across the capital cities. So. Nonetheless, your modelling is predicting potentially 46 to 59 One Nation seats and potentially a Labor minority government.
Yeah, look, and it's in places around Australia that have been experiencing a decline in disposable income now for a number of years. So, I downloaded some of the Productivity Commission's numbers on those stats, and what's writ large is that you've basically got 3 types of Australia present right now. You've got the inner urban parts of our large cities where disposable incomes have slightly declined or increased in some places. Flip side, it's dramatically been on a downward trend now for some time in both outer suburban and regional areas. And so basically, these Australians, they've absorbed 16 interest rate rises. Yes, they've had 3 of them cut and then 3 of them elevated again, but to give you some perspective here, that equates for the average mortgage holder, it's about an extra $20,000 a year. Now, the average household income is about 80 grand. So that's a very significant amount of money for someone and a family who are, basically just trying to break even every week. So they're at their wits' end, and we're seeing that writ large now in polling numbers. Yes,
I think the two critical points need to be made. Interested in your thoughts. We mentioned some of the right wingers, the loud and noisy right wingers on social media who think this is all about a reaction to immigration, that this is all a reaction to, Labor's sort of wokeisation of Australia. Quite clearly, people are responding to material economic stresses, and that's the major game here. They simply do not trust establishment institutions to address those problems.
Yeah, look, immigration and other issues are rolled out by a class of person who has no idea about the lived experience of people that we're talking about. It is always going to be the case that those inside the political bubble, that includes those individuals online as well, that they will always focus on issues that have little to do with the material needs of people. Because the last thing you want to do is actually discuss the elephant in the room, which is the salaried Australian has been going backwards now for some time, and you don't want to really address the issues that they are confronting. The Labor government's attempted to do that by basically recalibrating the budget narrative towards them. They're not feeling the love at the moment, and it will be some time before any of those measures actually flow through. But immigration, who gets to walk in what toilets, it's all these issues that we see all the time that particularly those on the right side of politics jump on because, why would they want to talk about the economy?
I'm stunned because you don't lay awake at night wondering what a toilet sign is going to point to.
Oddly enough, if you're trying to feed your kids and put clothes on them and work out how you're going to afford the next pair of shoes, maybe you're not really getting worked up about who walks in what toilets.
It's a serious point, though, because it's and to come back to your polling numbers and the MRP, there's been a lot of noise around about how unpopular the budget is. My view is Labor needs to hold its nerve.
Yes.
Budgets take months to filter through the electorate, particularly the key segments that we've been talking about, millennials and Gen Z and those stressed in the mortgage belts. The Liberals and some of their cheerleaders have made a big deal about the budget, and this is how the Libs can get back in the game. But quite clearly, if you look at the numbers, following their logic, their big attack lines have been on so-called broken promises, on capital gains, negative gearing, and trusts. Now, if you follow their logic, because they've been saying that we can instantly declare the budget the most unpopular budget since Keating or Joe Hockey or whoever it is, if they're arguing that we're sort of in this age of hyperpolitics and we can automatically judge how people have responded to the budget, well, then they should have responded to the budget by boosting the coalition's primary vote. But the coalition is stuck at 20 across numerous polls. It is the third most popular party at present.
Well, they went backwards.
Yes.
They went backwards. So if really we're going to make a judgment call on the budget, yep, Labor's lost skin, no question. But so have they, and they've lost it all to One Nation again. So maybe, okay, well, if we're going to believe their narrative, then yes, okay. Perhaps people's response to the budget is anti-establishment, right? Which is what we actually are seeing, right? So it's really a rejection of the duopoly, and this trend will continue. And I don't think the situation is going to reverse at all. I think people have woken up now to the opportunity that they can send established political players a very strong message, and they're going to send it. And I don't think anything that's going to be done is going to reverse that. And we'll go back to the point that you made, Nick, around immigration. Only about 13% of One Nation's base actually gets animated about immigration. It's largely, as our research has shown, fueled by an anti-establishment sentiment, burn the house down, throw the chessboard over, as we've touched on before in many other episodes. So, that's what we're dealing with here. And we have to contrast this to what we are seeing across the world. The change in lived experience by younger generations versus older generations of baby boomers that is as significant. You have to go all the way back to the 1300s to find a generation where something drastically changed in such a significant way. And what I mean by that is that for most of human history, generations lived very similar lifestyles to their grandparents and their great-grandparents. Accumulative wealth didn't change all that drastic until, of course, World War II and the post-World War period, where, in particular, baby boomers, as a broad generation, absorbed massive amounts of economic growth. And now that's reversing. And that is a drastic change that's akin to basically the Black Death, which, of course, had the reverse effect, where it moved Labor to the epicenter of power Before that, if you had land, you were tied to that land as a serf. You had no other options but to obviously sell your labour at a very cheap rate. In most cases, you were actually tied to it for a hereditary process. Yeah, that when the shortage of labour came around, suddenly they were able to ask for greater levels of pay and conditions. Now we've got the opposite occurring, right, which is going in the other direction. Both events, and there are smaller events through human history have actually occurred in this space, create a revolutionary environment. It completely upends the social norms, and that's what we're seeing right now.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think the boomer point as well, that material prosperity and changes in technology, mass television, et cetera, created a distinctive kind of youth culture, created the concept of the teenager.
Yes.
And, it meant that, boomers started behaving, really the first generation had started behaving differently to their parents and started voting for parties which didn't necessarily align with their class position in society. They've sort of returned to the median, didn't they, in the Howard years, Kos? Because they had all those assets, had all those assets to protect.
I mean, the sort of wealth that generation was able to accumulate has never been seen in human history.
Yeah,
I mean, we've got to actually just put that into perspective here. You have to go back to royalty in the Middle Ages to see something that's similar, right? I mean, I know it's an extreme point I've just made, but that's how wealthy that generation became and still is. And so, yeah, there's a decline of that. Is it something that we could say that perhaps that lifestyle, that level of wealth was never going to be long-term sustainable? Maybe. But again, the consequences of working class people losing standards of living and having to basically tie themselves to a mortgage that they are captive to and expend huge amount of their labour and their wages to feed that mortgage or feed that rent. You could say we're back to, again, that serfdom, right? Where basically you are tied to someone else loaning you money and you're bound by that. And unfortunately for many Gen Xers right now, well into their 50s, they're coming to the realisation that perhaps they're going to reach retirement age and still be owning money to the bank.
Yes, well, not sure it's serfdom, Kos, but definitely the fact that we live in a class-based society should be shaking the political class. Your key point is Australians and many and most people across the Western developed world have got poorer since the GFC, and in particular after COVID, the last 3 or 4 years. And again, it's where I stress I think Labor needs to hold its nerve, but listen. It's working class and the working poor and lower middle class Australians. 90% of them are wage and salary earners. They don't earn. They don't own investment properties.
No.
They don't have trusts. They don't sit around the kitchen table going, "Ooh, maybe we should set up a trust today." They're not represented by lobby groups. They're not able to go out on social media and create ridiculous meme campaigns. They are invisible, in a sense, in political debate. And the critical point, as you make in that excellent Substack, is the loudest people in politics are not the largest groups in society.
That's right. Yeah, I was about to say that's exactly what you were just talking about.
Perhaps the coalition needs to go back and rewatch Scott Morrison's election night speech, full of hubris as it was in 2019, where he spoke about the quiet Australians, because the quiet Australians haven't all of a sudden become the noisy Australians on social media.
Never have, and it's you were detailing some of the points I made in that Substack, and that is you have a political culture in this country where these salaried Australians barely get their voice heard. And no one goes into lobby for the aged care worker, in the outer suburbs who probably hasn't seen a significant rise in their pay for a very long time. They don't have endless commentators on Talkback and so on talking on their behalf. These people have now worked out a way to be heard, and we could see that in the polling numbers. and particularly in regional Australia, but also the outer suburbs. Fortunately for Labor, many of these people also continue to support Labor, and they are situated overwhelmingly in the big cities. They have a different response to their economic plight. It isn't to choose Hanson, it's to stick with the Labor camp, but Labor has to continue, to your earlier point, has to continue with its narrative in pitching to that next generation. Because if they waver and they succumb to the pressure from the loud lobby groups, then they too will face the same erosion.
Yes, but that would seem to. I mean, if they do crack under the pressure of a noisy campaign from powerful minority interests, that's only going to further create a further sense of disillusionment amongst the people who are giving One Nation a hearing, because they'll just scratch their heads and think to themselves, well, they never really believed what they were saying and what they said they were going to do. So we can't trust them, even when apparently they've broken promises.
Yep, I think the next election's now going to be fought between two camps that largely represent salaried Australians. There's a third, and that's the coalition that is left basically representing the group that was very vocal over the last couple of weeks. Overwhelmingly, if you were to run a poll across people who've got trusts and investment portfolios and so on, they are overwhelmingly in the inner city or inner city suburbs, and in the majority vote Liberal. And yes, there are exceptions. Yes, there are people who vote Labor or One Nation or Greens who too have a trust or an investment portfolio, but those numbers are proportionally much lower. And so whenever the battle of the two parties, they basically represent people with incomes and who pay income tax and don't have any tax benefits or tax breaks at the next election, unless something changes.
So if it is a Labor One Nation contest, Kos, and it looks almost certain, and I just think this Victorian state election is going to tell us so much about where our politics is heading. It is the litmus test. It really is the dress rehearsal, along with the next New South Wales ballot, for what we can expect at the next federal election. If it is now a Labor One Nation contest, does Labor need to recalibrate? Is it going to be able to recalibrate? Because we're talking about this broad angst at the political class, and one of the problems for all the parties is whether you argue they've been captured by the same kind of insider knowledge class professionals. I think there's a lot to that story, although Labor looks a lot more like modern Australia than the coalition.
That's right.
It's not necessarily then just about policy A, policy B, policy C, because we know that's not how voters vote. They're not rational creatures. They're not sort of calculators adding up policy A, B and C. And we saw that in Farah, because we saw, Get Up, we're going to speak to next week to one of the founders and integral centrifugal forces of One Nation, Ed Copper. Get Up rolled in there with sort of dropping in facts and fact checking on One Nation, but it blew up in their face. It only seemed to stir that anti-establishment feeling more. So that my point, roundabout point, is how does Labor recalibrate when it's not necessarily a policy? It's not a traditional public policy contest.
I would slightly disagree with the point on Get Up not having an impact in Farah. I think Get Up was running a campaign that was going to energise the types of voters who were going to coalesce around the independent. There is a demographic ceiling in Farah for that, right? And there's a demographic ceiling for organisations like Get Up or organisations like Advanced. So, one from the left, one from the right. The capacity to basically reach into the other side's block is limited, right? So you're always going to have people, for example, especially if they're part of the Gen Z generation or even millennial, where your ability to approach them from a right-wing perspective, being advanced, is extremely limited, because these people are psychologically predisposed to respond to stress and financial stress for an economic populist road. So I think there is value and a role for these particular institutions and organisations, but there is a limit. There's always a cap. And if you're operating in a seat like Farrer, you're going to have a ceiling that's much lower. If you're operating in a seat that is in the outer suburbs, it's got a large first-generation young migrant community, your ceiling is much higher, right? Because people's response there will be more inclined to accept your narrative. So I think that, the future will be really a contest of Labor holding its base, which we know is pretty solid, right? Even with our numbers that we published this morning. I mean, Hanson's negative satisfaction rating, and I'll read out these figures because it's important to show you what these blocks look like. Amongst Labor voters, her net satisfaction rating is negative 54, Trump territory, right? Amongst Green voters, it's even worse. It is negative 79. But critically, amongst Australians who are voting for other parties, not One Nation, not the Greens, not Labor or Liberal, and so on, and independents, she's also negative 36. Now, Albanese, overall in the negative, worse numbers than Hanson. We've got that reported, it's pretty clear. However, he's positive 60 amongst Labor voters, and he's positive amongst Green voters, and his negative satisfaction ratings are lower amongst other party voters than Hanson. So it depends who we're talking to. Right, that's right. Correct. It's absolutely mirror image. I'll put that graph up on socials to show that, because that's what we're dealing with here. So when people say, well, that's your ceiling, you could see the ceiling's approaching. There's still growth for One Nation. There's still another 12. So her satisfaction ratings amongst Liberal voters is still in the positive, which is interesting. So there's still growth there. So that's ominous for the coalition. But yeah, that's the new world we're in. It's a very polarised one. It's regional versus urban. The ability of One Nation to win seats deep into the big cities is extremely limited. And going to your point about the Victorian state election, yeah, it'll be interesting. I mean, we are looking in that state at a Liberal brand that's a bit stronger than it is nationally. So that will be interesting to see. But we're going to see a whole bunch of 3- and 4-way contests.
That's something you haven't said for a long time, Kos, that the Victorian Liberal brand is strong.
A little bit, yeah.
Because
really the contrast is, if you're a Conservative voter and you're sitting either on the Liberal pole or the One Nation pole, you have a really deep dislike for the Victorian government. That there's no doubt. That's writ large in all the polling numbers, whether it's ours and every other polling company in Victoria. So sure, I mean that tends to motivate the Liberal base a bit more. It's all about, the cycle. But if One Nation's surge continues and they are able to basically tell Victorians who don't plan to vote Labor and who are sitting on the right side of politics in this state, that they could actually be the real opposition, that would be interesting.
I want to ask you a question.
We don't know.
I want to ask you a question in a minute about what the Liberal base does, the rump. What do they do if this, if we're saying it is this two-party contest? But let me ask you the big question, Kos. Your MRP suggests One Nation in a federal election could win more than 50 seats. Pauline Hanson is talking about contesting the House of Representatives. People said that Brexit couldn't happen. People said that Trump couldn't happen, including me, initially. They said Nigel Farage couldn't happen. Nigel Farage is most likely to be Britain's Prime Minister after the next general election. Why should Australia be different? Could Pauline Hanson actually become Prime Minister? A year ago, people would have laughed.
Yeah, you would never rule anything out, but there are limitations, right? So a third of the Liberal base will actively vote against her. Now, that varies depending where we are. So in the inner cities, so let's say we come to whether it's an inner urban Sydney electorate, an inner urban Brisbane electorate, an inner urban Melbourne electorate, and so on, there's no longer a third, it's close to a half. And what we know through our research is that if these small C Conservatives are confronted with a contest, whether it's an independent or whether it's a Labor candidate and the main contender is One Nation, they will tactically vote to stop One Nation.
Yes, that was my question. Yeah,
there is definitely a ceiling. And so we're not going to see exponential growth here because there is that centre that's missing. Now, I know that some Teal independents have been talking about setting up a party, but there is a part of the Australian constituency and political geography that is currently politically homeless. So they're just sitting on the Liberal Party just out of default. Now, it'd be interesting, right, if this sort of centre, Teal independent sort of entity starts establishing itself as a political party, will that accelerate the collapse of what's left of the Liberal Party's moderate base?
What would it do to the Greens? Because it's quite clear that the Teals are an option for university-educated professionals who think the Greens are too far left. I mean, I think
too far left.
My gut feeling is that the idea of a Teal party, particularly to scoop up Senate seats, isn't a good idea.
No,
because it damages the whole independent brand, and also, and most commentators have missed this. Listen, we've had a version of the Teals in the Senate. They were called the Australian Democrats, and they're dead.
The Teal independent movement is fueled by a group of Australians who are highly connected to politics, progressive,
like the
possibly a
Democrats.
little bit dry on the economics, who want to see an adult in the room when it comes to their politics. So, that's why Pocock is so popular. The pressure they'll come under is if they don't form something that's substantially opposed to One Nation, these voters will demand it. So they will demand a nationwide response to what they think is a threat from the right. So I think that there is opportunity for them, but to your point, it ain't really the Senate, it's the lower house. That will be interesting to see what happens if they do get into that space. But again, we are living through a transformative period, and if they put their hand up as well, we could be looking at 5 parties, not just 4.
Yes, indeed. Kos, 2 quick questions to finish. Do you think Pauline Hanson will contest the lower house seat, and is it a good idea? And I can add Barnaby Joyce into the mix too.
She could win quite easily. There's plenty of seats for them to stand in. Barnaby Joyce will win New England almost on primary vote alone based on our MRP. And it won't be hard for her to find a seat in Queensland to win comfortably either. So there's plenty of homes for her. She can easily transfer to the lower house and she'll win. There's no question about that. Will she do that? That's up to her. She is, I think she's nearing 70 odd.
She just turned 70, Kos.
She just turned 70. Well, there you go. So, if she thinks she's still got it in her, good on her. I mean, if she does decide to stand, she'll win. As in a lower house seat, not the Prime Ministership. Let's put it. In case any of their listeners think we're getting carried away.
You're not ready to make that prediction quite yet.
Right.
It's fascinating, though. Looking ahead to 2 elections, so Victorian state election, where are your thoughts at? Are we looking at a hung parliament? Are we looking at a slim majority Labor government? Are we looking at a slim Liberal majority government? What are we looking at, Kos?
Yeah, whenever I'm asked that question, the only response I can give at the moment is that, this one's for the textbooks. And 2, I can't see the 2 majors getting to 45. I always say this, if you think the Liberal Party and Jess Wilson will get to 45, can they do that with their vote in the 20s? No. If you think Labor can get to 45, can they get there with their vote in the 20s? No. So unless, but is it easier for Labor to get to 45? Yes, because they only have to move their primary by a few points. The coalition needs to move it by a bit more than just a few points to get to 45 off their own steam. They need to win 16 seats. They need to shoot the lights out, and they've got One Nation hunting all over the place. So if Jess Wilson's going to be Premier of Victoria, it will be with One Nation. And that's the new paradigm we're in.
We are in a new paradigm, Kos. Thank you for your insights and wisdom this morning. It's going to be fascinating as observers of Australian politics to see where the One Nation juggernaut finally lands, and whether in 2.5 years' time, there's still a Liberal Party to discuss.
Yes, that's right. We'll find out.
We will.
It could change because the leader could change it all. We've spoken about that person, haven't we?
We have. I think that's becoming more and more likely that
right.
Mr. Hastie will lead the Liberal Party and the coalition to the next election. That's a topic for another day, Kos.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Curtin listeners. Don't forget, check us out, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, because you probably are. But refer a mate, refer a comrade, refer a toffee. We will see you next week when we're chatting to Ed Copper, author of Angertainment, Why Social Media Destroyed Everything. But for now, it's ciao and arrivederci.